Hi, I'm Nick O'Leary from the Node-RED project, here with the release notes for the 2.0 release. The main focus of this release has been dropping support for old versions of Node.js that themselves are no longer supported. This in turn has allowed us to make some major dependency updates in the internals, which has required a bit of time and effort to do properly. As such, there are not a lot of big new features in this release, but there certainly are plenty of useful things to play with. So now, Node-RED 2.0 does not support anything earlier than Node.js 12.17. At this point, we would generally recommend Node 14. One of the challenges for new users getting started with Node-RED is finding their settings file if they haven't run Node-RED yet. To make this easier, we've added a new command line option to Node-RED to help generate a settings file. You can run it using node-red admin init on the command line. It asks you a series of questions about how you want to configure your environment, such as setting up user security and other related options. This makes it much easier to get started with a well-configured, secure Node-RED environment. Now, as part of this work, we've taken the opportunity to reorganize the default settings file. The settings are now organized in a much better order with clearer sections to help users find their way around it. And we've updated the default settings file to hard code the flow file name to flows.json. Previously, we left it unset, so the runtime would use the host name to generate the flow file name, and that could catch people out when they moved a device between different networks. And because we've only changed the default settings file, existing installs will carry on exactly as they've run before. In the editor, we've added an option to replace the ACE text editor with Monaco, the text editor component from Microsoft that's used in VS Code. This gives a much richer code editing experience in the function node and elsewhere, with better content-aware editing and content assist. The switch should be pretty transparent, but it's possible there will be some nodes in the ecosystem that bypass the APIs we've always provided and try to use ACE directly. So to that end, users at the moment have to opt in to using Monaco via their settings file, and the goal will be to switch fully over to Monaco as the default in a future release. In the last release, we made it easier for the function node to use external modules. Once enabled in your settings file, you could then configure what modules the function node could use via its edit dialog. Based on feedback we've received for this feature, we've made some changes in this release. Now, the feature is enabled by default for new installs, but it can still be disabled via the settings file. The UI has been reworked to give a cleaner list of the modules and what variable they will be available as within the function code. And we now support both normal node modules and ES6 modules, because under the covers we use dynamic imports to handle both module types. And quite importantly, we've moved the directory where the modules get installed back into the top level of your user directory, which means you have a single package.json to manage all your dependencies, rather than split over two directories. The first time you run 2.0, it will automatically reinstall any external modules you already have in the new location. The Inject node has a new button in its edit dialog that will trigger the Inject node with the values from the edit dialog rather than the values currently deployed. That makes it much easier to quickly inject different values whilst testing a flow. The node's button in the flow, in the main view, will still inject the current deployed values as it always has. The RBE, or Report by Exception node, is one of the hidden gems of the palette. Given how many times it's the answer to a question on the forum, it's been clear that we needed to make it more discoverable. With this release, we've done two things. We've added it to the core palette, whereas previously it was installed via an extra module, and we've rebranded it the filter node. Under the covers, it still uses the RBE node type, so existing flows will not be affected. Also, that means it will still show up when you search for RBE. Users following existing guides will still be able to find it. And giving it the name filter should help users find it and more instinctively understand what it's there for. And it also opens up the option of adding more filtering options in the future that wouldn't have fitted under the RBE name. We've removed node-red node tail as a default dependency. This means you'll need to manually reinstall that module to get the tail node back if your flows use it. And we've made a bunch of other updates to the nodes. There's a new setting to set the working directory of the file nodes, so you can be explicit how relative paths should be resolved, rather than relying on whatever the working directory of the node-red process happens to be. The delay node in rate limiting mode can now dynamically change the rate it's using the message.rate property. And you can also use message.flush to specify how many messages the node should release, rather than doing them all, so it allows for a more controlled one-at-a-time release. The debug sidebar supports displaying map and set type properties. The file-in node has a new option that will include all input messages when sending one message per line of the file it's reading. And the exec node has a new option that will hide the console window when running under Windows. And the WebSocket client node can now be configured to send a heartbeat ping message automatically. One of the benefits of low-code programming with tools like Node-RED is it abstracts away a lot of the technical detail of how things are working. It allows you to focus on solving the problem at hand. But just because it's low code, that doesn't mean you can't have the tools you need to make high quality applications and help debug when things aren't going as they should. So to that end, we've also released a pair of new tools that will bring new superpowers to Node-RED Flow developers. First up is the Flow Debugger. This acts like a regular code debugger, but at the flow level. You can set breakpoints on node ports, either inputs or outputs. Then, whenever a message arrives at a breakpoint, it can pause either just that node or the entire runtime. And when paused, it will show you how many messages are queued up at each point in the flow, and in the sidebar, you get to see a queue of those messages in the order that they're going to get processed. Each time you click the step button, the next message is taken from the queue and processed. The message queue also lets you step forward individual messages out of order, or even delete them. And this is just the start for the Node-RED debugger. We've got some more great features coming in the future, such as adding conditions to breakpoints, or allowing you to edit the in-flight messages. The second tool we've released is the Flow Linter nrlint. This can be used to identify potential problems in your flow based on a large set of rules the linter provides. For example, it can warn if you have an HTTP input node that's not connected to an HTTP response node. Or maybe you have nodes that are physically overlapping each other in the workspace. Now we've modelled the linter after ESLint, which we also bundle in one of the rules to help lint JavaScript in your function nodes. We've designed the linter to run in the browser using a worker thread, meaning it doesn't impact the performance of the editor. The sidebar shows you the linting results and lets you quickly navigate to the areas of the flow that need attention. Outside of the editor, nrlint can also be installed and run as a command line tool against flow JSON files. This means it can be used to validate flows in build pipelines. Today we've got a fairly small set of rules, and a recent call for input from the community has generated a long list of great ideas to implement. We're sure there's going to be some slightly more esoteric rules out there that perhaps don't belong in the core set. For example, some third-party nodes may want to introduce guidance about how their nodes are used together. So to support that, the linter rules are all pluggable, allowing custom rules to be created and shared with the community via NPM modules. And that's everything I had for you today. If you have any feedback or suggestions, then please do join the forum and let us know what you think. And don't forget to like and subscribe if you haven't already for future updates on this channel.